Step outside. The temperature is 114 degrees Fahrenheit. The sun sits directly overhead. There is no air conditioning, no electric fan, no refrigerator humming in the corner, no cold water waiting for you. Just sand, silence, and a merciless sky. Now imagine living your entire life like this, building homes, raising children, farming fields, and constructing temples that would outlast empires in exactly this heat. The ancient Egyptians did precisely that for over 3,000 years. They didn't survive by accident. They survived by engineering an entire way of life around one enemy: heat. Thick walls that trapped cool air, clay jars that turned dry desert wind into refrigeration, clothing, schedules, and even cosmetics built around the sun's movement across the sky. And the strange part is, almost none of it required fire, metal, or machinery. It required understanding physics before physics had a name. But their system had one fatal weakness. A single force controlled whether any of it worked at all: the Nile. When the river cooperated, Egypt thrived. When it didn't, even the cleverest cooling trick in the world couldn't save them. Let's start where every Egyptian spent most of their life, inside a house built to fight the sun. Welcome back to Imtisk. Ancient Egypt is usually remembered for pyramids and pharaohs, but underneath the monuments was something less glamorous and far more essential: a civilization that had quietly mastered the physics of survival. They couldn't cool the desert, so they engineered everything around themselves instead: walls, water, clothing, and time itself. It started with mud. 1. The house that fought the sun. Logic says a hot climate needs thin walls so heat can escape quickly. Egyptian builders discovered the opposite worked better. Their homes were built from mud brick, Nile silt mixed with straw, shaped and dried in the sun. The walls were thick, sometimes over a foot deep, and that thickness was the entire strategy. Thick mud acts as thermal mass. It absorbs heat slowly during the day, keeping interiors noticeably cooler than the outside air. Then, once the desert temperature drops sharply after sunset, the walls release that stored heat back outward. The house becomes a heat buffer, running roughly 12 hours behind the outside world. Wealthier homes added a second trick: the malkaf, or wind catcher, a tall shaft built into the roof, angled to face prevailing winds. It captured moving air above the building and funneled it down into living spaces, while hot air escaped through openings elsewhere. No motor, no electricity, just air pressure and geometry doing the work of a modern HVAC system. That solved the building, but people still had to drink and keep that water cold. 2. The ancient refrigerator. Leave a bottle of water in 110 degrees heat and you'd expect it to turn lukewarm within minutes. Egyptians avoided that using something deceptively simple: unglazed clay jars called kulas. Unlike glazed pottery, these jars were porous. Water seeped through microscopic gaps to the outer surface. Once that surface moisture met dry desert air, it evaporated. And evaporation is not free. It pulls heat energy directly from its surroundings, including the water still inside the jar. You've felt this exact principle. Wet your hand and stand in front of a fan. Your skin feels colder almost instantly. The fan isn't producing cold air. The evaporating water is pulling heat away from your hand. Egyptians didn't need a fan. The desert supplied one for free, constantly, in the form of dry wind. The hotter and drier the air, the faster the evaporation, meaning the harshest days produced the coldest water. Their environment's biggest threat had become its own solution. But water only handled part of the problem. Humans still had to work, walk, and stand under direct sun for hours. That required a different kind of defense. 3. Protecting the body. Kohl, the dark liner rimming ancient Egyptian eyes, wasn't just style. It was mineral-based makeup, often containing lead compounds like galena, and it served a functional purpose, cutting glare from the blinding desert sun, similar to the black stripes athletes wear under their eyes today. But cosmetics were only one piece of a much larger discipline. Loose linen clothing let air circulate against skin while blocking direct UV exposure. Head coverings shielded the scalp and neck, the body's most heat-sensitive zones. Shade wasn't a luxury, it was scheduled into daily movement. And the underlying principle was simple. Don't try to defeat the sun, just deny it easy access to your body. And that principle extended beyond individuals. It shaped how entire labor forces were organized. 4. The secret of the workday. Egyptian life ran on a 3-season calendar dictated by the Nile. Achet, the flooding season, Peret, when floodwaters receded and crops were planted, and Shimu, the harvest. This wasn't just agricultural bookkeeping. It dictated when human labor could safely happen. Heavy work was pushed towards cooler hours, early morning and late afternoon. Midday, when the sun sat highest, was for rest and shade. It's the same heat management principle still used on construction sites and farms in hot climates today. Work early, rest at peak heat, hydrate constantly, and use shade relentlessly. Egyptians had no thermometers or heat stroke warnings. Their real technology was scheduling, an organizational system built from generations of trial and error. And fueling that system required food and hydration that could survive the heat, too. That's where beer came in, though not in the way most people assume. 5. What beer actually did. Egyptian beer bore little resemblance to a cold six-pack today. It was thick, low in alcohol, and closer to liquid bread, a fermented grain drink packed with calories, given regularly to laborers, including those who built royal monuments. It's often called an ancient sports drink, but that framing oversells it. It wasn't hydration technology. It was food that happened to be liquid, practical, calorie-dense, and easy to distribute at scale. The real lesson isn't about beer at all. It's that no single item saved Egyptians from the heat. Cooling came from an entire interlocking system. Architecture, water, clothing, scheduling, and nutrition working together. Remove any one piece and the system weakened, but it didn't collapse because it wasn't built on any single trick, except for one resource every part of that system quietly depended on. 6. When the system failed. The Nile wasn't just a river running through Egypt. It was Egypt. Its annual flood deposited nutrient-rich silt across the floodplain, the foundation of every harvest. But the flood wasn't guaranteed. In years when it fell short, crops failed, grain reserves shrank, and the ripple effects reached further than most people realize, because water scarcity didn't just threaten food, it disabled cooling itself. A clay jar can only cool water through evaporation if there's water to spare. In a drought, the very technology designed to fight heat became a luxury few could afford. This was the hidden fracture point in an otherwise brilliant system. Egyptian architecture was sophisticated, their organization was disciplined, their understanding of physics intuitive but effective, yet none of it could operate independently of the river that made it all possible. The desert never lost, it simply waited for the Nile to weaken. Ancient Egyptians didn't beat the heat by inventing some singular miracle device. They survived by building an entire civilization in cooperation with physics. Thick walls to slow heat, wind to move air, evaporation to chill water, scheduling to avoid the worst hours, and shade to protect the body. None of it required electricity. All of it required observation, patience, and repetition across thousands of years. And that lesson still applies. Hot air still rises, water still evaporates, thick walls still slow heat transfer, shade still works, no batteries required. The Egyptians didn't need equations to know these truths. They lived in them long enough to master them without ever writing them down. But Egypt wasn't the only civilization forced to outsmart its environment. Somewhere else in the ancient world, another people faced the opposite nightmare, surviving underground where the world above had become unlivable. If you want to see how they solved it, the next video is waiting. Subscribe to Imtisk for more stories of the ingenious ways ancient civilizations engineered their own survival.